Hey guys, this is Dave with Gazaudio. Today we're going to be taking a look at the topping E70 Velvet desktop DAC. I also have the E70, which I recently reviewed, so we'll do some comparisons along the way with that one as well. As for what's included in the box, as you can see, I don't have it out normally like I usually do because I wanted to have it plugged in, and I am going to be pairing it with the L70 amplifier here shortly, but it's basically the same thing you get in the box with the E70. So you got the Bluetooth antenna, you've got a power cable and a USB cable. So of the devices in the E-Series lineup, the Velvet is the most expensive. It comes in at $449. Now, as for the design and specifications, it looks identical to the E70 with the exception of the branding on the front. That being said, I do like the simplicity of the design. I like the red accent on the volume knob as well. They basically just added the word Velvet to the front. It has a metal chassis, glass front, and of course the build quality is excellent. As for displays, buttons, knobs, inputs, and outputs, on the front we have a touch-sensitive power button that also doubles as an input selector. We also have a volume control that, if you push, also doubles as a selector button as well, allows you to access certain areas of the menu. So both of the buttons on the front are multifunctional. There's also an LCD screen that displays your menu and volume levels. On the back, you have your stereo balanced XLR outputs. Right next to those are the RCA stereo outputs. Then we have our coaxial, optical, USB, and Bluetooth inputs. It also has a 12-volt trigger, power connector, and the main power toggle. As for the internals of the E70 Velvet, it uses AKM's 449EX, which is AKM's newest flagship DAC chip that works in combination with the AK4191EQ. And those are paired together with the XMOS XU316 processor, and that can decode up to 32-bit PCM and DSD512, but only through the USB input. The optical and coaxial will decode up to 24-bit PCM and DSD64. When it comes to Bluetooth, the Velvet has Bluetooth 5.1 and can support basically all the latest Bluetooth formats, including LDAC, aptX HD, aptX LL, SBC, and AAC. As for additional features like the E70, the Velvet offers the ability to select a specific output, so XLR only, RCA only, or you can select both if you choose. It also has several different filters, but I didn't really notice much of a difference between them. However, I just ended up using the filter at number 5 because it's basically NOS, or non-oversampling mode, which is no filter at all, really. And that's how I did the majority of my testing. Okay, let's talk about the sound of the E70 Velvet. Again, we will do some comparisons with the E70 along the way. And these impressions were done with the E70 paired, the Velvet paired with the L70 headphone amplifier. I will have a review actually of the L70 out soon, by the way. Now, as for the overall sound presentation, I would consider the Velvet to be neutral, but with some added dynamics throughout the whole frequency spectrum. And when I was doing a side-by-side comparison with the E70, I noticed that the Velvet just had a little more life and even more treble energy, just slightly, than the E70. And this was something I had mentioned in the E70 review, but next to the Velvet, the treble of the E70 just sounded as though it had a slightly smoother presentation. So the most notable difference between the Velvet and the E70 was in the dynamics for the most part. The Velvet, again, just has a little more life to it. And while I had no problem at all feeling engaged with the music while I was listening to the E70, the Velvet just seemed to draw me in a little bit quicker. Now, just to break it down a little more, we'll start with the bass. As far as the bass levels, again, they are neutral to my ears, so they're not elevated in the sub bass and bass, and that carries through to the mid bass as well. There's also excellent bass extension well down into the sub bass frequencies, so there isn't any roll off at all. And as far as punch and impact, the Velvet delivers it with confidence. It also reveals ample amounts of bass texture and mid-bass detail. And there's an ample amount of punch and sub-bass rumble and slam. The transition from the bass to the mid-bass just sounded really tight, clean, and controlled. Honestly, I think this is probably the best bass I've heard from a DAC under $500. Period. It's just excellent in my opinion. As for mid-range clarity and detail, the Velvet is excellent. Instruments and vocals sound very natural and real, and everything just sounds, again, a little more lively and dynamic. So I talked about a test track I used while testing the E70 and while comparing it to the Velvet called Petier by Go-Go Penguin. And the drummer is doing some really solid rim shots, and they have how I can only describe as a weighty, full-bodied sound. And you can not only hear the body of the snare, but the wood of the stick as well when he's striking that rim. And the E70 portrayed that beautifully, but the Velvet gives you just a little more liveliness and physicality to those strikes. Now, I've had the Velvet and E70 for quite a while, so obviously I've listened to a lot of different tracks with lots of different IEMs and headphones. So this slight bit of extra dynamics is something I noticed with almost all of my test tracks to one degree or another. As far as other instruments, so trumpets, pianos, guitars that fall into the mid-range, they're all reproduced superbly and sound almost as real or natural as many of some of the best DACs I've heard. And that applies to both female and male vocals as well. They sound very, very good. I don't know how else to say it. The mid-range, like the bass, is just excellent. And again, I have to be completely honest here, and at risk of sounding redundant, that same level of detail, clarity, and just overall natural presentation that you get in the bass and the mids carries all the way through into the treble and upper treble as well. So a couple of tracks I use for testing treble are Oh Lady Be Good, which is a track off the Jazz the Pawn Shops album, and Daft Punk's Fragments of Time. Both tracks are great for testing cymbal and hi-hat detail, and Oh Lady Be Good is probably my favorite because at the beginning of the song, the drummer does a few types of cymbal strikes and accents, and he does it on different cymbals and different parts of the cymbals. And there are a few strikes where he bumps the bell of the cymbal with the shoulder of his stick instead of the tip, so the effect is more of a heavier, blunted sound as opposed to a pingy light sound, again, like you might achieve when you're striking with the tip of the stick. And as the song progresses, each instrument gets its little moment to shine, and they all kind of have their little solos. And depending on the instrument's dynamics, the drummer is playing off of those dynamics. So this is a really good track, again, for testing instrument timbre and detail as well. And air and imaging. It's just a great recording, period. But going back to treble detail, the Velvet did an excellent job at retrieving pretty much all the detail there was that could be retrieved. It also has excellent cymbal decay. All of the notes feel like they had resolved completely and didn't feel cut off at all. And like I said, this recording is also great for testing air and atmosphere, and all of those upper treble frequencies were very, very good and done just so well by the E70 Velvet. And that kind of segues us into the technicalities. And again, that song, Oh Lady Be Good, is a great song for testing that as well. But I also have another album I use frequently for testing soundstage and imaging, and that's Macy Gray's Stripped album. And the whole album is great, but the first track, which is called Annabelle, is the one I'll typically use for testing that. But the way they have the instruments panned or laid out is the guitars on the left, bass is on the right, and the drums are vocals are centered. Some of the cymbals are panned kind of soft left and soft right, but the snare, like the vocals, the snare and the kick are basically centered. And the Velvet placed them almost perfectly. Of course, as I always say, the device will perform only as well as your IEM or headphone. That being said, the Velvet gave me a nice wide soundstage, and again, the instrument placement was excellent. It also has good instrument and vocal weight, but I think the star of the show for me is well, a couple of things. First, Firstly, again, the dynamics, and secondly is detail retrieval. So I guess the question is the E70 Velvet worth the extra $100? And also, does it get my recommendation? And the answer is this. And I said this at the end of the E70 review as well. If you already own the E70, keep your money and don't upgrade to the Velvet because the E70 is already awesome. But if you're in the market, you're trying to decide between the two, between the E70 and the E70 Velvet or any other desktop DAC really at this price, get the Velvet because it's probably the best DAC under $500 out there in my opinion. And not only does it get my recommendation, it gets my top recommendation and it pairs really, really well with the L70 amplifier. It's simply an excellent stack in my opinion for under $1,000. So yeah, this was probably one of my easiest recommendations ever. So yes, the E70 Velvet gets my highest recommendation. So that concludes my review of the topping E70 Velvet. If you're new to the Giz Audio channel and like our videos, please take a minute and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to take it a step further with your support, we also now have a Patreon. I'll make sure and leave a link in the description. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this video. Please like this video. Please share this video. I hope you guys have an awesome day.